Evelyn Hart had lived alone for 2 years in a small apartment on the edge of Portland. It was quiet, predictable, and a little lonely. Her days were spent writing articles for clients she never met. And her nights were filled with the soft hum of the city outside her window. But one evening, as the rain tapped against the glass, something broke that silence. A man's voice, low and steady, coming from the other side of her wall. At first, she thought he was on the phone. But then she heard him pause, repeat a line, change his tone, and say it again. He was rehearsing. His words carried through the thin wall like whispers meant only for her. Evelyn sat still, listening to the rise and fall of his voice. Deep, emotional, full of meaning. It wasn't just noise. It was like someone pouring his heart out into the air. She couldn't see him, but she could feel something in his tone. A quiet sadness, a longing she recognized. She tried to focus on her writing, but every time he spoke, her thoughts drifted toward him. She didn't know who he was, but she began to wait for that voice every evening. He read lines, sometimes softly, sometimes with emotion so raw it filled her little apartment. It felt strange, comforting, and unsettling at the same time. The next night, she heard him again. "Do you believe people can come back after they're gone?" he said, his words breaking slightly. Evelyn froze. It wasn't a line from a play this time. It sounded personal. The room around her felt smaller, the air heavier. She realized she was holding her breath, listening to a stranger's heart break through a wall barely thicker than her hand. For weeks, it continued. Sometimes it was laughter, sometimes silence, sometimes the sound of him pacing the floor. Evelyn tried to ignore it, but she found herself creating stories in her head about him. Maybe he was an actor, maybe a teacher, maybe a man healing from something he didn't talk about. Whatever it was, she could feel it. Late one night, when the rain had stopped and the city outside was still, she heard him whisper, "I miss you, Anna." His voice cracked. The sound of those 3 words hit her harder than she expected. Evelyn didn't know who Anna was. But she knew what it felt like to miss someone so much that even saying their name hurt. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering about the man whose pain she could feel through the plaster. He was a mystery, a voice filled with grief and tenderness. She thought about knocking on the wall, maybe just to let him know someone was there. But she didn't. It wasn't her place. Still, something about it didn't feel wrong. It felt human. Days passed, and the voice became part of her life. She didn't tell anyone about it. It was her quiet secret, the sound that kept her company when the world outside felt too distant. There was a rhythm to it now. He spoke, she listened, and somehow, both of them seemed less alone. One Sunday evening, she sat by her desk, trying to finish an article, but her mind was somewhere else. The voice returned, softer this time, calmer. He was reading again. When love leaves, it doesn't take everything. It leaves a sound, a scent, a memory. Evelyn felt her heart tighten. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just practicing lines. He was trying to speak to someone he had lost. She began to wonder what he looked like. Was he tall? Did he smile often? Was he young or older? She caught herself thinking about it too much, then laughed at how absurd it was to feel connected to a stranger through drywall. But every time she tried to stop listening, her heart didn't let her. One evening, while making tea, she heard something different. His voice wasn't calm or practiced. It was trembling, broken. "I thought time would make it easier," he said. "But I still wake up expecting you to be here." Then came silence. Evelyn stood still, the kettle hissing behind her, steam filling the air. She wanted to say something, anything, but she couldn't. There was no way to reach him without crossing a line that night. She sat close to the wall with her mug, her fingers brushing against the cool paint. "You're not alone," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt connected not just to him, but to something deeper, something real. It was strange how sound could bridge the gap between two strangers, how a wall could become a thread instead of a barrier. Over the next few days, Evelyn found herself listening for signs of him, footsteps, music, anything. Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes she caught a faint hum, like he was thinking out loud. The silence between their walls became more meaningful than words. Then one morning, as sunlight filled her small apartment, she heard something she hadn't before. A soft knock. It wasn't from the wall. It was from her front door. She froze. Nobody visited her this early. Carefully, she set her coffee down and walked to the door. When she opened it, she saw him for the first time. He was taller than she expected, with messy dark hair and tired eyes that held both sadness and kindness. He gave her a small nervous smile and said, "Hey, I think your mail ended up in my box again." Evelyn's heart skipped. It was him, the voice. She managed a polite smile, pretending to focus on the envelope he held out. But her mind was spinning. The voice that had filled her nights, the one that made her feel less alone, is now standing right in front of her. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Sorry if you ever hear me talking to myself through the wall," he said with an embarrassed laugh. "I'm an actor. I rehearse a lot." Evelyn smiled, relief and curiosity mixing inside her. "I don't mind," she said. "It's nice hearing someone so passionate about what they do." He grinned, surprised by her kindness, then waved and walked away. When she closed the door, she leaned against it, her heart racing. The wall between them suddenly felt thinner than ever, not just in sound, but in distance. That night, she didn't hear his voice. The silence was louder than usual, filled with something new, possibility. And as she lay in bed, staring at the faint shadow of the wall in the moonlight, she realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes, connection doesn't come from seeing someone. It comes from feeling them, hearing them, and knowing even through the thinnest wall that someone else is there. Fighting their own quiet battles, too. The rain returned outside, soft and steady. And somewhere beyond that wall, Evelyn knew he was probably listening too. After that first meeting, Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about Liam. The man behind the wall now had a face, and it was nothing like she'd imagined. He was kind-looking but tired, as if life had taken too much from him too soon. His smile had been polite but fleeting, like he hadn't used it in a while. For days after their brief encounter, Evelyn listened for his voice again, but the wall stayed quiet. She told herself not to care. He was just a neighbor, a stranger who happened to rehearse next door. Still, she missed the sound of him. The silence felt heavier now that she knew who it belonged to. One evening, as she was pouring herself coffee, she heard faint music, a piano. The notes drifted through the walls, slow and delicate. Then came his voice, softer than before. He wasn't rehearsing. He was singing. The melody was sad but beautiful, like a conversation between pain and hope. Evelyn leaned against the wall, eyes closed, and listened until the last note faded. The next morning, there was another knock at her door. Her heart jumped. She knew it was him even before she opened it. Liam stood there holding a small package. "This came to my door again," he said, smiling sheepishly. "I'm starting to think your mail prefers me." Evelyn laughed. "Maybe it just likes crossing thin walls?" That made him chuckle, a sound that instantly eased the quiet tension between them. They ended up talking longer this time. About the building, about the weird plumbing sounds at night, about how small apartments made you hear more of people than you wanted to. Liam told her he had moved in 6 months ago, hoping to find peace to work again. When Evelyn asked what kind of work he did, he hesitated before saying, "I'm an actor. Or at least I used to be. Haven't really been doing much lately." She nodded, pretending not to know she'd been listening to his rehearsals for weeks. "I can tell you're passionate about it," she said. "It's rare to hear someone speak with that kind of emotion." He looked at her curiously. "You heard me, didn't you?" Evelyn froze for a second, then smiled nervously. "Just sometimes. These walls don't really believe in privacy." To her surprise, he didn't seem upset. He laughed softly and rubbed the back of his neck. "I should have guessed. You probably think I'm crazy talking to myself every night." "Not crazy," she said quickly. "Just honest." That seemed to catch him off guard. He studied her for a moment, like he was trying to decide if she meant it. Then he smiled again, softer this time. "Thanks. That means more than you think." After that, they began to run into each other more often in the hallway, at the mailbox, sometimes on the stairs. Their conversations grew warmer, easier. She learned he loved old movies, black coffee, and late-night walks. He learned she was a writer who preferred stories that made people feel something real. But beneath his calm, Evelyn sensed something he didn't say out loud, a sadness that never fully left his eyes. One evening, the wall came alive again. She heard his voice, quiet but shaking. He wasn't rehearsing this time. "I can't do this without you, Anna," he said. "I thought time would fix it, but it didn't." Then came a soft thud, maybe him sitting down. Silence followed. Evelyn's hand moved instinctively to the wall. Her fingers rested on the cool paint, as if she could reach through and offer comfort. But she didn't speak. She just stayed there, listening, her heart aching for him. Whoever Anna was, she had left a hole in his life that no words could fill. Over the next few days, Liam seemed quieter. His door stayed closed. No music, no voice, just silence. Evelyn wanted to check on him, but didn't know how to without crossing a line. She found herself typing his name in her writing notes, as if his story had slipped into her imagination without asking permission. That weekend, she went to the local bookstore to clear her mind. But when she came back, she found Liam sitting on the building's front steps, his head resting against the railing. He looked up and smiled weakly. "Hey, Evelyn, rough day?" she asked gently. "Just one of those days when you realize you're living more in memories than in the present?" He said with a sad smile. She sat beside him, silent for a while. The streetlights flickered and the evening breeze carried the smell of rain. "Memories aren't a bad place to visit," she said quietly, "as long as you don't start living there." He turned to look at her. "You sound like someone who knows what that feels like." "Maybe," she said. "Writers tend to get stuck in what-ifs." Liam chuckled. "Then maybe that's why we're neighbors, to people living between stories." Evelyn smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, he didn't look lost. That night, she couldn't focus on anything. Every time she glanced at the wall, she imagined him sitting there on the other side. Maybe drinking tea, maybe thinking of Anna. She wondered who Anna was, a girlfriend, a wife, someone he couldn't forget. The thought made her heart twist in a way she didn't understand. The next evening, she read by her lamp. She heard soft footsteps next door. Then his voice, not talking but humming. It wasn't sad this time. It sounded like someone slowly finding their way back to living. Evelyn smiled without realizing it. But then his voice came again, quiet, uncertain. "Evelyn." She blinked, startled. He had never said her name through the wall before. "Yeah," she said softly, unsure if he could even hear her. "I just wanted to say thanks," he said, "for talking to me, for being kind. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to talk to until I met you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something meaningful, something that could tell him he wasn't alone. But all she managed was, "You're welcome, Liam." There was a short pause. Then he said, "I think I owe you coffee." Real conversation, not through the wall this time. She smiled, her heart fluttering. "I'd like that." For a long moment, silence returned. But it wasn't the same as before. It was calm, hopeful, full of unspoken words waiting for their turn. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his voice in her head. Not the rehearsed lines or the sad whispers, but the way he'd said her name, like it meant something. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, she was curious. The thin wall that once kept them apart had become something else, a bridge. And as she drifted off to sleep, she realized something quietly beautiful. Sometimes the people meant to change our lives don't knock loudly. Sometimes they're just a voice through the wall until one day they're standing right beside you. Days passed after that night when Liam had asked her for coffee through the wall, but he didn't come by. Evelyn tried not to overthink it. Maybe he was busy, or maybe he had changed his mind. Still, every sound from the apartment next door made her heart jump. Footsteps, drawers opening, the soft hum of music. His presence had become a quiet rhythm in her life, and she didn't realize how much it mattered until it wasn't there. One rainy afternoon, while Evelyn was editing an article, someone knocked on her door again. She opened it, and there he was, Liam, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing that slightly awkward but sincere smile she'd grown to recognize. "I finally made good on my promise," he said, lifting the cup toward her. "Didn't want you thinking I'd forgotten." Evelyn smiled and stepped aside. "Come in before the rain ruins your apology." He laughed softly and walked in. It was the first time he'd been in her apartment, and his eyes scanned the room curiously. It was small but warm, books everywhere, candles on the windowsill, a half-finished manuscript open on her laptop. "Looks like a writer's cave," he said, handing her a cup. "Guilty," she replied. "And you actors cave next door?" He gave a quiet nod. "Used to be. I haven't really worked in a while." They sat on the couch, sipping coffee as the rain tapped against the windows. For a while, they just talked about ordinary things. Movies, favorite books, the best places to get coffee in Portland. But then, without warning, the conversation turned deeper. Liam set his cup down and leaned back. "You've probably heard me before. Talking to someone named Anna." Evelyn hesitated, unsure what to say. But he smiled faintly, as if saving her from pretending. "It's okay. These walls don't keep secrets very well." She nodded quietly. "I did. I wasn't trying to listen, but I know." He interrupted gently. "It's fine. Maybe I needed someone to hear me, even if it wasn't on purpose." He paused for a long time, then said Anna was my fiancée. "We were supposed to get married 2 years ago. She got sick. It happened fast." Evelyn's chest tightened. His voice stayed calm, but there was something fragile behind it. Something that carried both love and loss. "I thought if I kept working, kept acting, it would help me move on," he continued. "But every line I read started sounding like something I should have said to her. I stopped taking roles. I couldn't fake emotions that were too close to real." Evelyn didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She just listened the way she always had, only now he could see it. After a moment, he smiled weakly. "You know, it's strange. Talking to you feels easier than talking to most people I know. Maybe because you've already heard me at my worst." She smiled softly. "Maybe it's because I didn't try to fix anything." He looked at her, surprised, then nodded. "Yeah, everyone wants to fix you. No one just listens." The rain outside grew heavier, and the small room filled with the quiet sound of it. Evelyn felt something shift, not just between them, but inside her. She had spent so long living behind her own invisible walls, keeping people out, writing stories about emotions she rarely allowed herself to feel. But with Liam, it was different. He wasn't perfect or strong all the time. He was real. After that day, things changed subtly but meaningfully. They didn't have to knock anymore. Sometimes they would just talk through the wall again, like before. Only now they both knew who was listening. "Are you writing tonight?" he would ask, trying. She'd reply, "But my characters are being difficult." "Then give them a good line," he'd tease. Something honest. And sometimes she would hear him rehearsing again, his voice carrying through the wall, steady and full of feeling. Only now it wasn't just pain she heard. It was strength. He was coming back to himself, one line at a time. One night, Evelyn sat in bed with her lamp on and heard him speaking softly. It wasn't a script this time. "You know," he said through the wall, "I used to think grief meant holding on. But maybe it's learning how to let go without forgetting." She smiled sadly and replied, "I think you're right." There was silence, then a faint laugh. "So I'm not just talking to myself tonight." "No," she said, smiling. "You've got an audience, and I'd better make my performance good," he said lightly. It became their routine, small conversations that somehow meant everything. Sometimes they spoke for hours through that thin wall, sharing fears, dreams, and pieces of themselves they hadn't shared in years. The wall became their strange form of comfort, a safe distance where they could be honest without being exposed. But slowly, that distance started to feel unnecessary. One evening, Liam said quietly, I was thinking about taking a role again. Evelyn smiled, feeling a surge of pride. That's great, Liam. You should. I'm terrified, he admitted. It's a story about loss, about starting over. I wasn't sure I could do it. You can, she said simply, because you've lived it. There was a pause on the other side, and then he said, You always know what to say. It's only because I've had practice listening. She replied softly. That night, she didn't hear him rehearsing. Instead, she heard music again, a piano piece she'd never heard before, gentle and hopeful. It played for a few minutes before fading into silence. Then, after a long moment, he spoke again. Evelyn, he said quietly, his voice steady but uncertain, I think I need to see you. Not through this wall. Not like this. Her heart stopped for a second. She stared at the wall, her fingers tightening around her pen. For weeks, this wall had been their bridge, their safety. But now, he wanted to step across it. She took a deep breath and said, Okay. When she said it, she realized it wasn't just him who was ready. She was too. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed every moment, the first voice she'd heard. The sadness that connected them, the comfort they'd built without ever really being together. She wondered what it would be like to finally face him, not as the stranger behind the wall, but as the man who had slowly walked into her heart. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the city quiet. Evelyn sat by her window, staring at the faint glow of his apartment next door. It felt like looking at a different world, one she was about to step into. And though her heart raced with uncertainty, one thing was clear. Sometimes the wall that keeps you apart isn't made of bricks or distance, it's made of fear. And maybe the bravest thing a person can do is to take one small step forward and see what waits on the other side. The next evening came quietly, the way all important moments do. Evelyn stood in front of Liam's door, her heart pounding faster than she wanted to admit. She'd told herself she was just going to return the book he'd lent her, a small reason. A harmless excuse. But deep down, she knew this was different. This was the night she would finally step inside when he opened the door. She saw the surprise flicker in his eyes before a warm smile spread across his face. You actually came, he said softly. Stepping aside, of course, she replied, trying to sound calm. Though her hands trembled slightly, his apartment looked almost like hers, small, cozy, but full of stories. The first thing she noticed were the paintings leaning against the wall. Some were finished, others half done, all filled with emotion. You paint? She asked, walking closer to one that showed a sunrise over an empty beach. Sometimes, he said. It helps when words aren't enough. Evelyn nodded, her eyes tracing the soft brushstrokes. His plays felt like him. Gentle, a little messy, full of quiet meaning. They sat down, and for a few minutes, neither spoke. It wasn't awkward silence, just a heavy one, the kind that comes before something important. Finally, Liam broke it. I almost didn't ask you to come. Why? She asked because I wasn't sure I was ready to let someone in again, he said. But then I realized you were already there. You've been there since the first night you heard me through that wall. Evelyn's heart ached. You weren't the only one talking, she admitted. Some nights I wanted to say something back, but I didn't want to make it worse. He smiled faintly. You didn't. You made it better. You made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely lost. It's the way he said it, soft, sincere, made something inside her melt. For months, both of them had been hiding behind walls, literal and emotional, now sitting across from each other. It felt like they'd both finally decided to stop. Liam stood up and walked toward one of the canvases. This one, he said, pointing to a painting of two figures separated by a thin line. I made after the first time I heard your voice. Evelyn blinked in surprise. You heard me? He nodded. You were on the phone with someone. You said, I think people come into our lives when we need them most. That stuck with me. She smiled, touched by the memory she hadn't even realized mattered. I guess I believe that more now than ever. They both laughed softly. But behind that laugh was something deeper. A quiet understanding that this connection wasn't random. It was something rare, something that had grown slowly and naturally, without either of them meaning to. As they talked, time slipped by easily. They shared stories about their pasts, the small joys, the losses, the moments that shaped them. Liam spoke about Anna, not with the same pain as before, but with a calm acceptance. "I'll always miss her," he said, "but I think I was holding on to the wrong thing. I wasn't keeping her memory alive, I was keeping myself stuck." Evelyn nodded. Sometimes love doesn't end when someone's gone. It just changes. It becomes something you carry. He looked at her then, really looked the kind of look that makes everything else fade. "You've helped me remember that I can still feel without it hurting." Her heart fluttered. Maybe that's what we're both doing, remembering how to feel. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The air between them was heavy with something new, not grief, not loneliness, but quiet possibility. Liam walked to the small table by the window and poured them both tea. "You know," he said, handing her a cup, "I used to think walls kept people safe. Now I think they just make us lonely." Evelyn smiled gently. "Maybe it depends on what's on the other side." Key chuckled. "In that case, I'm glad you were." They talked late into the evening, their voices blending with the soft sound of rain outside. Every now and then she caught him looking at her like he still couldn't believe she was real. And she felt the same, that something so simple could feel this right. When the clock struck midnight, Evelyn realized how late it was. "I should probably go," she said, setting down her cup. Liam nodded, though there was hesitation in his eyes. "Thank you for coming over." She smiled. "Thank you for inviting me." As she walked toward the door, he said quietly, "Evelyn." She turned. He looked uncertain, almost shy. "You don't have to stop talking through the wall, you know. But I'd rather see you like this." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Then maybe next time you can come to my side." He smiled, a real smile, not the tired one she'd first seen. "I'd like that." Evelyn stepped out into the hallway, her heart full. The air smelled of rain and coffee, and as she closed his door behind her, she felt like something inside her had changed. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone in the world. That night, lying in bed, she stared at the wall between them. It looked the same as always, plain white, unremarkable. But to her, it wasn't just a wall anymore. It was a witness to everything that had happened. The words, the pain, the laughter, the healing. She reached out and touched the wall gently, whispering, "Good night, Liam." A moment later, his voice came through, soft and calm. "Good night, Evelyn." It was a simple exchange, but it meant everything. Over the next weeks, things began to shift naturally. They spent more time together, cooking, talking, taking walks by the river. Liam started rehearsing again, this time with confidence. Evelyn began writing stories that felt alive again, stories inspired by connection and courage. Their lives began to blend in quiet, beautiful ways. There were no grand confessions or dramatic moments, just steady warmth. It's kind that grows when two people truly see each other. And though their story had started through a thin wall, it had become something stronger, something that no wall could ever separate again. One evening, months later, Evelyn came home to find a small canvas leaning against her door. It was a painting of two apartments with light shining from both windows, and a single line between them slowly fading into nothing. On the back, Liam had written just one sentence: "Some walls were never meant to stay." She smiled. Her heart full. Evelyn hung the painting on her wall, right where she used to press her hand when listening to his voice. The space that once held silence now held color, warmth, and a reminder of how love can find its way through even the smallest cracks. Sometimes healing doesn't come with loud promises or perfect endings. Sometimes it begins with something as simple as a voice through a thin wall and ends when you finally step inside.